But right now, I want to welcome to the program from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, John Diedrich is with us, one of the reporters who, again, broke this story, ATF using rogue tactics in storefront stings across the nation. John, thank you, sir, for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
Absolutely. First of all, I have to say this is a very impressive story. As somebody who spent a couple of years as an investigative reporter, I know what had to have gone into this story. So I congratulate you and your colleagues for uncovering this and reporting it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Okay, so first question, what has been the reaction and the reception to this new information that's come out here? This wasn't just an isolated sting in Milwaukee. As a matter of fact, as you guys point out, from Albuquerque to Pensacola to Portland, Oregon, a series of bad decisions and tactics that raise a lot of questions and eyebrows.
Yeah, well, you alluded to the fact that there was a Milwaukee operation, and that's really where this started for us. Through sources, tips from the landlord and law enforcement sources, we learned about this troubled operation in Milwaukee, this storefront sting, and they had a number of problems in that sting, to include the agents having their guns stolen, damage to the property, wrong people arrested, hiring a mentally disabled man to promote their operation. But at the time, and there was a lot of scrutiny after that, but at the time, the ATF assured congressional staffers that this was an isolated incident, and that the technique was valid and was solid and being used elsewhere. So, we put that to the test, and as we looked across the country, from operations from Portland to Pensacola, Albuquerque, Phoenix, Wichita, we found a number of the same problems, and also some new ones that we hadn't seen in Milwaukee.
Yeah, okay, so a couple of things seem to have occurred on more than one occasion. The idea of using developmentally disabled or brain damaged individuals, low IQ individuals, as sort of the middleman between ATF agents and individuals in the community, using these individuals to try to use them to get drugs and guns into these storefronts.
Yeah, that's in Milwaukee. That was the case where an individual was hired. He actually thought he has an IQ in the mid-50s, which is, according to experts, quite low in terms of what he's able to accomplish. And he was hired and paid in cigarettes and cash and merchandise to promote the store. And then ultimately they approached him to broker deals. Very, very similar scenario happened with Tony Brunner in Wichita. He was hired by the agents to go and reach out to the community. His attorney thinks that's because he's black, and the community where the defendants largely came from is a black community. The agents were white, so this makes some sense. It's interesting, from early on in the video, the agents are heard talking in the surveillance video, referring to Tony Brunner in Wichita as slow-headed, and he's the one, which would suggest that there was some knowledge of that, that he had some limitations. In Portland, there was an individual who was developmentally challenged, and in that place, that location, they convinced him and suggested and paid him to get a tattoo down his neck of the storefront operations logo itself, which is a squids, and it's a squid smoking a joint. And he and another man got that tattoo.
Taxpayer dollars, as I understand, not only paid for that tattoo, but ultimately paid for the removal of that tattoo as well. John, I know that the ATF has not responded to a number of FOIA requests. They've not released the result of its internal investigation into Milwaukee. Do you know when the Inspector General's report is scheduled to come out? And is this going to focus on just the Milwaukee case, or will some of these other cases that you all have uncovered also be included in that report?
Well, so you referenced the Inspector General, and they are investigating this. And it's interesting, the lens through which they're looking at this is post Fast and Furious.
Right.
As I'm sure your listeners will recall, Fast and Furious was examined by the Inspector General's office. A very lengthy report was issued, and recommendations for reforms within the Bureau came after that. And what the Inspector General is coming back on and saying is, how are those recommendations in Fast and Furious coming to fruition with an eye to this Milwaukee operation. It was just the Milwaukee operation until yesterday when, on the heels of our investigation, ATF went to the Department of Justice Inspector General and asked them to widen their investigation into their storefront operations to include the findings of our piece on Sunday, noting that it certainly would appear to be not just a one operation type purview, but a larger area. As far as when that's going to be done from the Inspector General, it's somewhat sort of mysterious as to when they're going to come out with their products. They don't talk publicly very much. The spokesman will just say that things are ongoing at this point. But you also allude to the fact that we've heard very little from ATF. They did issue a statement yesterday saying that they had asked the Inspector General to look at this. They also said that they noted they didn't dispute any of the findings of the investigation that we published at all. They did say that they have initiated some changes within the department, for instance, issuing a manual for best practices, which they apparently did not have before, and other safeguards that they said would help avoid these problems, prevent them in the future. And they noted that our operations were that we focused on were all happening before that. Though, again, those words are, we want to see the FOIAs, we want to see the documents,
right?
We want to see the investigation into Milwaukee. None of that has been forthcoming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the other questions is, do we know with any certainty that these are the only cases that are out there, or because, as you say, the ATF has not even said how many storefront operations have been set up. So I guess one of the big questions is, what else don't we know, John?
Well, yeah, and that's a very good point, because so the way we this was one of the requests that we had is we said, well, what stings have been done, and fair enough, we're not going to ask what stings are you working on right now.
Right.
I mean, law enforcement, certainly is entitled to this element of secrecy and surprise that allows them to do their job. So and agent safety is an issue. We get all that, so we're not asking for stings that are sort of going on right now. But past stings, that's relevant, and they do promote these through press releases and other means, but not all of them. And perhaps the ones that they don't promote are the ones that the outcome was not what they intended. For instance, there was no publicity about the Milwaukee operation. And when I spoke to my sources here on the prosecution side, they certainly said, well, we weren't going to put out anything about this case. I mean, in Milwaukee, the final case is wrapping up here today, and of 34 individuals who were initially charged, 16 ended up with no time at all. 8 of those were dismissed because they either charged the wrong person or the prosecutor decided not to move ahead for various reasons. They couldn't use the ATF agent and so forth. So, that's not the kind of outcome, certainly in federal court. That's not really what, as I've talked to federal prosecutors, that's not the outcome, and these are not the kind of cases that federal court was really designed for.
Yeah. All right. Listen, I've got to ask you, I could talk to you all afternoon about this story, honestly, John, but I've got to ask you about one more thing.
Sure.
Because it seemed like some of the allegations that you all were reporting, that I believe it was Portland, where they had set up right across the street from a middle school within 1,000 feet. They had the Xbox there. They were inviting kids to come in and play for free. That was the place I believe you had reported as well that underage drinking was allowed, pot smoking was allowed. There are allegations that when these pawn shops were set up, that they were paying top dollars for basically any item, no questions asked. It sounds, John, like in some cases these agents were actually creating crime in these neighborhoods.
Well, and that's the conclusion that a number of individuals who've looked at this, and these are people who are former prosecutors who looked at this and said, okay, there are legitimate prosecutions. I mean, dealing within 1,000 feet of a school is a felony. These sorts of things. There's laws on the books, but the question is being raised here is that, are you creating crime in essence to solve it? And what the folks that we've talked to inside the agency and those who are familiar with the agency said, it's a lot of pressure to make numbers, and that pressure can lead individuals to create a scenario in which the numbers are achieved. Whether it's actually getting to what the target would be for a federal law enforcement agency, which would be to work up the ladder to get the big kingpin or the criminal organization or so forth off? Or does this just become a numbers thing, and then you talk about creating a scenario, where you get to those numbers, and in the meantime, are you creating crime vis-a-vis, for instance, you mentioned the burglary thing, are you creating a place where people can come and fence stolen goods? I mean, that's a key to really igniting any burglary ring, is having a fencing operation, because you got to take the stuff somewhere. So that was the case there, and setting up across the street from the school in Portland, the agent claimed that they didn't know that they were across the street from the school, which raises all sorts of questions about negligent planning of the operation and what sort of foresight went into this. If you just didn't, I mean, if that's to be, if that's to be believed, I would take it on its face. Well, then that shows the negligence of that. So it just raises a lot of questions about the execution of this, but ultimately, to your point, what was the goal and what was the effect?
All right, talking with John Diedrich of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. John, please tell me that you're working on more more of this story, and follow-ups will be forthcoming.
Yeah, absolutely. We are. There's a number of things in the works, and I strongly encourage you to keep hitting our website and keep reading.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John, for coming on the program. Hope we can have you back again.
Anytime. Take care.
John Diedrich joined us of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.